There's a major standoff brewing over the city of Chicago. You've got the President of the United States on one side, threatening to send in the military to handle crime, and on the other, you have state and local leaders basically saying, stay away. This is a huge clash over safety, federal power, and what the numbers really say about crime in the city. So, what is actually going on? Let's get into it. Here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at who's on each side of this fight. Then, we'll unpack that crisis narrative you've probably heard. After that, we dive into the actual crime data, look at this whole military idea, and finally, explore what the evidence says about building a safer future. All right, let's start with Section 1, a city divided. So, President Trump hasn't been subtle about this at all. He frames a military deployment not as some idea, but as something that's definitely happening. The message is pretty clear. Federal action is on its way, whether local leaders want it or not, to deal with what he calls out-of-control crime. And the pushback from Illinois, it's been just as direct. Governor Pritzker's message is a complete rejection of the plan. He's basically arguing that this is a massive overstep and completely unnecessary. So yeah, the battle lines have been drawn very clearly. So that's the standoff. Now let's talk about the story that's being told. Section 2, the narrative of crisis. The political story here is one of a city that's just completely lost control. You hear these really strong words, right? Hellhole, chaos, bloodshed. It's all designed to paint this picture of failed local leadership, making the case that an outside force is the only possible answer. And the language used to describe the people involved has been incredibly intense. I mean, this quote really shows you how severe the rhetoric is. It's not just about crime as an action. It's about characterizing people as being born evil. That kind of language is used to justify a much stronger, more military-style response. But okay, that's the narrative. What do the numbers actually show? Because this is where the story takes a really interesting turn. So here it is, the one number that challenges that whole story. In the first half of this year, homicides in Chicago are not up. They are down. And not just down a little bit, they're down by a staggering 33%. And that's not just one source. This comes from both the mayor's office and the Nonpartisan Council on Criminal Justice. And get this, Chicago isn't just following some national trend here, it's actually leading it. While other big cities saw homicides go down by about 17% on average, Chicago's drop is almost double that. So right now, the city isn't an outlier for being dangerous, it's an outlier for getting safer, and getting safer faster. And this isn't just about homicides. Look at this, violent crime is down across the board. Shootings? Down more than 37%. Robberies? Down by almost a third. And vehicle hijackings? I mean, wow, they've been cut nearly in half. This is not a small dip. The data shows a really broad and significant drop in violent crime. So even with all this data showing crime is falling, the proposed solution is still the same: send in the military. But is that even legal? And how do the people who actually live in Chicago feel about it? Well, for almost 150 years, we've had this law, the Posse Comitatus Act. It's basically the bedrock rule that separates what the military does from what civilian police do. It was put in place specifically to prevent federal troops from being used like a domestic police force. It's a really foundational American idea. But, and this is a huge but, there is a major and pretty controversial exception. It's called the Insurrection Act. It gives the president a ton of power to basically bypass Posse Comitatus and send in troops to handle a rebellion or enforce federal laws, even if a state's governor is against it. And that legal gray area is right at the heart of this whole debate. So what do the actual people of Chicago think about all this? Well, according to recent polling, the answer is pretty clear. A big majority, 65%, are against sending in the National Guard. So while about a third of residents are okay with it, most people really do not want to see troops on their streets. Okay, so it's legally complicated and locally unpopular, but does it even work? What does the evidence say about using the military to fight crime? The evidence shows this really fascinating contrast. On one side, you've got the military approach. A real-world study of an intervention like this in Cali, Colombia, found little to no evidence that it actually made anyone safer. But on the other side, you have this public health approach. One simulation found that a small team of community violence interrupters could get the exact same reduction in homicides as a massive 150% increase in police. And then, of course, there's the cost. When the National Guard and Marines were recently deployed in Los Angeles for a similar kind of mission, it came with a hefty price tag, $120 million taxpayer dollars. That's according to the California governor's office. But it's not just about the money. Policy analysts warn about these other hidden costs. First, there's a cost to democracy. It blurs that critical line between the military and civilian life. Second, a cost to public safety itself. Think about it. Soldiers are trained to fight an enemy, not to police a community. And finally, there's a cost to our military's readiness, since it pulls people and funding away from their main job of national defense. So if the data shows crime is already dropping, and sending in the military is super expensive and maybe doesn't even work, what are the alternatives? What else can be done?
Well, social science points to a whole bunch of strategies that are actually proven to work. Things like helping crime victims to break that cycle of violence, or fixing up specific high-crime areas, like adding lights and cleaning up lots, or supporting local nonprofits. I love this stat. Research shows that for every 10 additional nonprofits in a neighborhood, violent crime drops by 14%. These are all evidence-based ideas that strengthen a community from the inside.
And this quote from a Chicago community leader, Reverend Marshall Hatch, just says it all. The call from people on the ground isn't for an outside military force. It's for investment in the local solutions that are already starting to work.
And all of this leaves us with the one central question. As Chicago sees this historic drop in crime, the debate is hotter than ever. Do you build a lasting safety by using force from the outside, or do you do it by investing in resources from within? The answer to that is going to define the future of public safety, not just in Chicago, but for cities all across the country.